Good morning and welcome to the Brooklyn Virtual State Legislative Forum, sponsored by AARP. I'm John Lentz, Editor-in-Chief of City and State, which is partnering with AARP New York on a series of forums this summer. Issues facing seniors are always important in Albany, but the coronavirus pandemic has made them more important than ever. Today we'll be talking about a variety of issues being addressed in the state legislature on this front. But first we'll hear directly from a couple of folks at AARP. Now I'd like to introduce Beth Finkel, State Director of AARP New York. Beth, welcome.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to City and State's Brooklyn State Legislative Forum, which is sponsored by AARP New York. As John said, I'm Beth Finkel. I'm the State Director for AARP. I do have to say I was born in Brooklyn, so you're going to hear it in my accent. I want to thank all of you for joining us virtually in this new world in which we live. In a few moments, John will introduce our special guests. These are your state assembly members and senators who represent you and your neighbors from Brooklyn in Albany. John will be introducing each of these legislators and then launch right into questions so we can carve out as much time as possible to hear their positions, plans, and priorities on issues that are important to the 50 plus. I want to emphasize that AARP is a nonpartisan organization. We do not contribute to political campaigns. We do not endorse political candidates. The purpose of today's forum is solely to educate our members and our participants on issues of importance so that they are better informed citizens. We are all gathered together. Normally, we would all be gathered together, right, in a big room. This would be a live event like we used to do. And I'd ask you all for a show of hands, like how many of you have loved ones in a nursing home? Or how many of you care for older family members or loved ones at home? Or how many of you take one or more prescription drugs regularly? And I would imagine seeing a lot of hands that would be going up. Nursing home conditions, family caregiving, and prescription drug costs are leading issues for AARP. And today, we'll be asking our state legislators what they're doing or plan to do about these issues. And with that, I want to turn things over to Reggie Nance, who is AARP New York's Associate State Director for Brooklyn. He's also our Associate State Director for our multicultural work and innumerable other issues that he is our expert on. So I'm going to pass it right over to Reggie. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, John, and thank you to City and State for sponsoring this most important Brooklyn Legislative Forum. And right off the top, I'm noticing that there are many of our AARP Brooklyn volunteers who are on. I want to give a special shout out to them. And they're the reason why we do over 100 events and programs in the borough of Brooklyn each and every single year. And they are, make no mistake, they are the heartbeat of AARP. Without them, there is no AARP. So I want to give a special shout out to the Brooklyn volunteers. And I'm sure our legislators can attest to the fact that they're everywhere in those red shirts. They're up at the Capitol, they're in district offices, they're at events and activities throughout the communities. They're ubiquitous, and we love them. And speaking of the volunteers, I'm sure they are just as anxious as I am to hear from our legislators. So I'm going to turn it back over to John, who's going to introduce our Brooklyn state legislators.
Great, thank you, Reggie, appreciate it. And let me point out again, AARP is strictly nonpartisan. So is City and State, so we'll do our best to avoid political attacks, keep it to a policy discussion. I'll now introduce the 8 state lawmakers that make up our panel, all representing parts of Brooklyn. We have State Senator Simcha Felder.
Good morning.
Good morning, Senator. State Senator Andrew Gounardes. State Senator Brian Kavanagh, who's running a little bit late, should be joining us in 5 or 10 minutes. State Senator Roxanne Persaud.
Good morning.
And then in the Assembly, we have Assemblymember William Colton, who I believe is joining us a little bit late. Assemblymember Nick Perry. Assemblymember Mathylde Frontus, and Assemblymember Joanne Simon. Welcome to you all, and thank you for taking the time to join us for this important discussion. I'll jump right in with questions. What proposals will you advance or support to address the high costs of prescription drugs, particularly now as the pandemic has made access to affordable prescription drugs more critical than ever? And Senator Felder, let's start with you.
Good morning, and thank you for sponsoring this morning's event and for AARP. I don't know if I'm trying to get this right. I'm a card-carrying member and delighted to be a member because I understand the significance of it, in addition to the fact that, thank God, I have an elderly mother. And we have to start out with the foundation. I think that everyone would agree that we have to do everything humanly possible to help our seniors and their, and I'll leave it at that. There's nothing that which should stop us from doing everything humanly possible to help them. So in the Senate, my colleague, for example, Senator Skoufis, introduced legislation that would allow us to import drugs from Canada at a much, much more reasonable price. There is nothing that takes the place of good competition. There is nothing that takes the place. And if we believe that, then, I'm really pleased that recently the president issued an executive order to lower drug prices in general the same way. In other words, to be able to buy drugs outside the United States and increase the competition, which inherently will make the prices of drugs lower. That happened recently, and as I said, we have some state legislation as well. So number one is increased competition. There's nothing that's just as good as that. And that in itself will bring down the price of drugs for seniors. And the proof to that is that the big pharma, the big companies came out fighting against it immediately. So if you're not sure whether it's a good idea, we can prove that by the fact that the big companies are very, very opposed to this and have been doing everything humanly possible to stop it. And I would just conclude by saying there are pieces of legislation that we've been working on to be able to have generic EpiPens, insulin, things like that, so that those drugs would be cheaper because those are extraordinarily expensive medications. And Senator Biaggi has a bill that bans pay the delay, which really is a cause for high cost of drugs. So there are a lot of things, there's a lot going on and a lot that can be done. But to conclude, just where I started is, I believe very strongly that the most critical strategy is to increase competition, and that will inherently reduce the cost of drugs for our seniors, which is such an important item.
A quick follow-up for you, Senator. I'm struck by the emphasis on opening up purchases from Canada, which I do understand would help things. Though, is there something Canada is doing on a more structural, fundamental level that we could emulate to bring down prices here, apart from just being able to buy drugs from Canada?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer. Maybe one of my colleagues do, but I don't have the answer to that question. My mother told me that if I want to seem smart, I should shut my mouth when I don't know what I'm talking about.
Thank you for that, Senator. On to our next lawmaker, State Senator Gounardes. Over to you addressing the high cost of prescription drugs in the state legislature.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. And it's great to be here with you all. I think a lot of the comments that Senator Felder, touched on really resonate and really apply. I echo a lot of what he said. I know there's been a number of efforts that a number of our colleagues have really put forth to help lower the price of prescription drugs. I'm really proud of the fact that this year we were able to cap monthly costs of insulin at $100 in the state budget. That was an effort that was, a bunch of our colleagues had worked on simultaneously, really led by Senator Gustavo Rivera, the chairman of the Health Committee. I had also introduced a similar bill last year to cap insurance payments, insulin payments, co-pays on a monthly basis. And we were able to get that done in the budget this year. Really, really significant, and I think really important for so many people, but especially our senior population. And Senator Felder talked about Senator Skoufis's efforts to allow for the importation of generic drugs. I think it's exactly right. Competition is good. Competition is important. We can do this in other places. Why we can't do it with medicine is really baffling and beyond me. And I think it's really important that we allow that to happen because we all know that with everything else, the prices keep going up on things, and the amount that a dollar can stretch gets smaller and smaller month after month, year after year. And if the price of drugs will continue to go up, we have to look at every tool in the toolkit and every weapon in our arsenal to help keep it affordable, because the alternative is terrible. Like if people can't afford their medicine, if people can't afford their health care, then the alternative is just they die. And we can't let that happen. We can't sit by idly and let that happen, especially when we know there are things we can do. So I think we made some progress this year. There's still a lot more work to do in the years ahead. And, it's work that I definitely want to continue working on in the Senate.
Great, thank you, Senator. Over to Senator Persaud.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks to AARP for hosting us. The high cost, my mother, who's a card-carrying member of AARP, said to me last week, she received notification from AARP about a high cost of medication, and talking about researching and competition. As Senator Felder and Senator Gounardes have said, competition is what we need. Too often the drug companies have a monopoly on the drugs that most of our seniors need. And so that drives the cost. They're not able to just get a generic version or to go somewhere else. And in the Senate, and my colleagues in the Assembly also, we've worked on trying to ensure that the cost of medication is lowered. We're looking at, for example, Senator Jackson introduced legislation that says, in this pandemic, when seniors they were struggling before, let us allow them without having pre-authorization from insurance companies to have 3 months worth of medication. So they don't have to worry about that cost. And the 3 months worth should be at the cost of the 1 month's cost. Canada's version, getting the medication from Canada, yes. Last year, Senator Rivera and I and a couple of other members went to Canada to see some parts of their healthcare system and what drives the cost. And what drives the cost is because they have a structure in place that's set by government, actually, that controls a lot of the cost. But so I'm going to leave that at that. But the cost is driven because there is no competition. That's what it is. And we have to work on that. So thank you.
Yeah, a follow-up for you, Senator. You mentioned insurers. There's also pharmacy benefit managers, sort of the middlemen, that has been a target, I think, for the legislature. There was a bill passed, vetoed by the governor. Are you up to speed on that bill and any position you have on that effort?
Well, I think most of us wanted the legislation to go through, that pharmacy benefit manager should be restructured and there should be oversight. We should know who's paying whom and all of that. But it's a powerful lobbying group that comes to the Capitol. So I'm just going to leave that way. It's something that we really have to work on.
Okay, thank you, Senator. We'll go now to the Assembly. Let's hear first from Assembly Member Nick Perry.
Thank you. Good morning. It's nice to see some of my colleagues. They look quite healthy. I don't know how I look, but I have been a senior citizen for a while, and that when I became about a little over 40-something years old, I started hearing from the AARP. I was a little annoyed because I didn't consider that I'd be a candidate for AARP membership, but they started reaching out to me for a long time. I still haven't joined the association, but I'm considering it because, look, I turned 70 years old, and I said, wow, I'm really a senior, and so I guess I'm right for membership with a discount, right, Beth? I'm pleased to join today's forum, and the conditions under which we live today are quite challenging for seniors, those who have health conditions and need medication. The challenge is not just the price, but we have a president in the White House who seems prepared to do anything to enhance his chances of re-election, even messing with the post office to the extent that the vehicle for distributing the medication to a whole lot of our senior citizens is the efficiency and the ability of this agency is being messed with in a very serious way. The service that they need, critical for survival. So while we talk about the cost of the medicine, we also have to be concerned about access to the medicine, the delivery of the medicine, because a lot of these medication where the seniors are involved in looking for the best price, and they're looking at the entire marketplace where they can get the best price, and a lot of that comes to them through the mail service, and so we have to make sure that while we're concerned about the ballots being delivered on time to be counted, that we don't forget that seniors also get affected by inefficient mail service or cuts in the mail service. That's a problem on top of the cost. Now, I often wonder why we have this big emphasis on Canada and why we have to, I see even colleagues introducing legislation that will provide access to the Canadian market and so forth. I believe the next administration and I'm hopeful that we'll have a new president and a new administration will focus and pay attention to good legislation, good law, legal system that provides for real consideration of the factors that affect the price of drugs, rather than leaving it to the marketplace. Because over time, we have seen and experienced the inability of the marketplace to be concerned about the plight of folks who don't have a market income, which means that they get their income based on what their value is. They're stuck on a fixed income in most cases. And when prices continue to rise, the challenge is to be able to get those drugs you need just to stay alive. And we do need to have a system here in the United States that predominates the market in regards to drugs. And I know that many of us are involved in efforts to achieve that. And I expect that we will succeed, hopefully, at the state level to deal with our situation in New York. But it would be much more easier if the federal government had a mindset that viewed the need for access to medication as an important part of staying alive for senior American citizens and folks people who are just not able to afford medication driven only by the marketplace. So I thank you for allowing us the opportunity to communicate with you today and to share this time with you. And please stay safe, everyone. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblymember Frontus, over to you. And in addition to the question of what can be done to address high costs in Albany, if you could touch on sort of how much the federal government has to do here and how much really the state can do on its own. Assemblymember Frontus, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So happy to be here. Proud to be here early today. I want to thank City and State and AARP for organizing this really, really important conversation. Many of you know I represent the 46th Assembly District, which means that I represent one of the highest concentration of seniors across all of New York City. So we're talking about something which is very personal, in which seniors in my district are sitting at the edge of their chairs listening to. This is a very timely topic for them. A lot of what I'm going to say today has been said before me by my colleagues in the Senate, my colleagues in the Assembly, but the bottom line when we get down to it all is that our seniors are asking us for lower prescription drug costs. That's literally all that they care about. We can sit here all day, we can have a lot of these very intellectual conversations, but they just want to know, what are we going to do? And John, you started this conversation by asking, what can we do? And as you know, in terms of how things work in the state legislature and the pace at which progress can happen, we have legislation at our disposal. Many of my colleagues spoke about pieces of legislation which we've signed on to. In the Assembly, many of us here have signed on to A7196, which I think has been discussed, which prevents the delay in introducing generic medication. And so again, the points that I wanted to share today, Senator Persaud, others have said, we can't allow the drug companies to have a monopoly on the prices in the market. We have to allow for competition. We have to create opportunities for our seniors to have access to generic medication, if that means keeping the drug costs low, even if it means having to consider importation from Canada, which as we speak, other states have done, such as Vermont, and we still have to keep an open mind and do whatever has to be done. I look at this from a bottom line perspective with the adage in mind of by any means necessary, because it's literally life or death for our seniors without any hyperbole. So it's something that we have to take very seriously. Now you talked about the federal government. I'm less clear, we're talking today about what could be done on the state level, but the federal government has to act. There are things they could do in terms of like patent manipulation, making sure that we have transparency, making sure that we have laws in place to prevent some of the things that we were talking about earlier, making sure that they disclose to our Attorney General what they're doing in terms of costs. So there are some things that they're able to do, but in summary, I want to say that I support AARP's and I see Beth here, 5-point plan to lower the drug costs. And I don't know if you were planning on getting into that, but I want to say that as members of the state legislature, we do support that. So that's allowing Medicare to negotiate with the pharmacies, importation from Canada, preventing the manipulation of patents, where I think the federal government can play a role, having transparency in the drug supply chain, et cetera. So those are things that we can all get behind in our role as state lawmakers.
Great, thank you. And over to Assemblymember Simon.
Hi, I was just looking that up, the 5-point plan. All of that. I just wanted to kind of pick up on something that Assemblymember Frontus just said, and that is about patent manipulation. The drug companies will take a drug that is working well, and they'll tweak it so that they don't have to, it doesn't go into generic status, and they can keep a new product on the market, which is slightly different because it's got a few more grains of aspirin in it, or it takes aspirin out of it, or it puts some Tylenol in it, or whatever, and it changes that formulation slightly. And that is a way that they are able to keep prices up and to keep profits coming into the drug companies. So that's a very important thing, and I think most people don't realize when there's a new and improved drug, it's often like new and improved Tide. It's really not much different than the last version of it, and it isn't necessarily any better for the people who would be prescribed that medication. So that's, I think, a very big issue, and that is so that we need to cover generics, but also understand better that marketplace. The other thing, of course, is insurance companies keep changing their formularies. And that means that people are often taking a slightly different medication, which may or may not be the best formulation for them because of the formulary, which changes the reimbursement for that prescription. And that can really affect anybody, but clearly seniors are on often on a number of medications. And then the other thing, which is just a big, big structural change issue, is passing the New York Health Act. Would make a major, major difference in everything we do, the way we do it, and just really change that marketplace and remove the incentives or the disincentives to lowering prescription drugs and healthcare in general by drug companies and insurance companies.
Thank you, Senator Simon. And State Senator Kavanagh has joined us as well. In case you didn't hear the question is, what proposals will you advance or support to address the high costs of prescription drugs? Senator Kavanagh.
I actually did, yeah, I hadn't heard the question, so thank you for repeating it. And I'm sorry to be disillusioned by Senator Simon about the qualities of new improved Tide. I thought it was going to make my clothing brighter and improve things. I also support the AARP program on this, the 5-point plan that Joanne said she was looking up just a minute ago. I think, I also my Albany roommate, Gustavo Rivera, who's the health chair of the housing committee, has been working very hard on, the much broader and comprehensive approach we need if we're really going to address the full range of medical costs. In the New York Health Act, we do need, as a state and hopefully as a country, perhaps if we have a change in the administration in Washington, to really address the fact that in spite of advances made in the Obama administration, that healthcare costs are still an enormous problem, especially for older people, but really for anyone who finds themselves with serious illness. And of course, this is a moment when I think people have a growing awareness of serious illness as a threat to our, to our lives and to our livelihoods, and of course to our financial well-being. So I also do want to talk about housing in a minute as the housing chair. And I think was one of the proposed topics for this. So I'll cut that answer short, but if there's an opportunity to like that as well.
Certainly, we'll get to housing momentarily, time permitting. I do want to switch to another hot topic, a very important topic right now, nursing homes in New York. Over 6,500 New Yorkers have died in nursing homes from COVID-19. The governor signed a bill to repeal legal immunity granted to nursing homes for non-COVID related issues, and only going forward, not retroactively, for COVID and non-COVID related issues. Do you think this repeal should be full and retroactive? And Senator Kavanagh, you went last. We'll let you go first on this question.
Yeah, so the initial bill that created the immunity was passed at a moment when, we really were in an extraordinary crisis where medical professionals in nursing homes and in hospitals and other care settings really were being asked to just do everything possible, often with people working out of their normal roles and normal titles. And at that time, and again, this was also while we were negotiating a very complex budget with them in the midst of a massive deficit shortfall. But that bill clearly went too far. It ended up effectively being a blanket immunity for almost anything that would happen in any of these facilities. We did take this step of scaling that back and making it clear that the immunity is limited from the effective date of the reform. I would say that, the legislature formally granting immunity in a very particular way, and the governor signing that, and then removing that retroactively is would be a challenge for. I think there were a lot of people that perceived it to be kind of switching a position that we had clearly taken, that many providers were relying on, again, including lots of folks that were working in very desperate conditions. So I think it was important to take that step and limit the immunity going forward. And it's an unfortunate fact in our system that when people are injured, we don't have, healthcare system that really, we rely on a system that assigns blame so that we can figure out how to compensate people. And so there's a broader question of whether we ought to be making sure our system, provides for people provides for the needs people have, rather than kind of relying entirely on a tort system.
Thank you, Senator. Assemblymember Simon, back to you on the nursing home issue. And unmute yourself.
Yes, I did. I thought it was better to mute myself when I was not speaking. I think that this issue about the liability waiver, I think a lot of people may not have fully understood it when it was passed. But I also want to remind people that at the time, and this goes to kind of Senator Kavanagh's notion about using the tort system, is that people would still have to prove that case. So I think the notion that the public may have, that if that liability waiver had not been passed, that we would really be able to hold nursing homes accountable for damages, for the loss of a loved one. Not so easy to make out those cases. You could spend a lot of time and energy trying to make out a case, but we didn't know very much about this virus. There's still a lot we don't know about the virus. And so what you'd have to prove to show the elements of a case for medical malpractice, for example, it's not clear to me that in as many instances as people believe that would be particularly likely. That being said, I think that it went way too far. And I'm glad that we passed the bill that we passed that pulled that back. And I think that's very important. I think it's important to reestablish the public trust in our nursing home facilities. Any congregate setting, nursing home facilities are one of them. Other people with disabilities that, for example, that are medically fragile, that are living in congregate settings. Any kind of infection is something we need to guard against. And this was really quite aggressive, as you know. And so I think we have to recognize that we don't know enough yet to know what all those answers are. But I'm glad that we passed the bill that we did more recently to pull back on that. I think that was the right thing to do.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Over to Assemblymember Frontus.
Yes, I agree. I mean, look, what can I say? Initially, this was all about holding the executives accountable. Many of us were on the ground when we were getting calls from our constituents about their loved ones losing their lives. That's something I will never, ever forget. At the height of the pandemic, really navigating those waters here in Southern Brooklyn, it was not easy. Every single day we were dealing with families. It was just a disaster, to put it mildly. The nursing homes were not being open and transparent, to be honest. They were not communicating with the families. They often didn't know what to do. Some of them were returning, telling the families, oh, we're going to send your great grandmother to the house. And families were saying, what are you talking about? We can't care for her here in the house. It was just, and on our watches, on the governor's watch, on all of our watches, we had all of these seniors, frail and elderly, who passed away. And it's something I'll never forget. It's our obligation as lawmakers to have stepped up, to have tried to do something about this situation. As you know, part of your question acknowledges that we tried to pass something to hold someone accountable. But I think, as my colleague in the Assembly said before me, and certainly we have a lot of attorneys who can attest to this, at the end of the day, when we talk about liability, when we talk about malpractice, it's something that has to be proven on a case-by-case basis. And I do support that. I think that we're sufficiently intelligent enough to do both things at the same time, to provide that accountability that's needed, and to look at each situation to see what was going on.
Thank you. Assemblymember Perry, anything to add?
Yes. I recall during the height of New York's struggle with the pandemic that nursing homes were allowed to admit or readmit seniors without testing for COVID. And the outcome was disastrous, because we know that a lot of seniors who perished during that period were residents in nursing homes. I think the way we dealt with that, and I believe that the governor at one point had ordered the nursing homes to permitted the readmission without the testing. That was, I think, a big mistake. And I also believe that the cover from liability did result in a bad impact on people's own, on the nursing homes, the organizations, how they operated when they realized they didn't have to worry about what it would cost them. Because that's always a detriment to bad behavior, when you know that you could face a lawsuit. And when we remove those protections, those are really actual protections for seniors in the nursing home, is that if they mishandle situations and don't assert enough care and precaution that will protect your lives, they won't face any consequences. So consequences are important. It's a part of how we keep human beings behaving themselves, and people making in decisions that will help your profit margin. So we have to make sure that as we move forward, we're mindful of that. And those of us who have the power to make laws and regulations, make sure that we don't ease up on the ones that protect people in situations like this.
Thank you, Senator Member. Over to the Senate then. Senator Gounardes, if you could follow up on that, and specifically, I believe the governor has said, look, we were just following federal guidelines, federal advice here, and there's also an argument out there that this was an unprecedented time, and nursing homes needed that kind of leeway to do whatever was necessary. Senator Gounardes, any follow-up on those points and the broader question?
Yeah, I think no one denies that this was an extraordinary time and that we didn't know in the heat of the moment what we were facing. But, a crisis is not an excuse to allow us to let our guard down for what we all know are reasonable and common sense safety standards and just general standards for how facilities should be operating. And unfortunately, what we've seen, at least anecdotally, and this is the subject of 2 hearings that we've had so far in the legislature, is that many nursing homes were not operating in good faith when they were interfacing with the public during the crisis, and that many of them were using the cover of COVID as an excuse to not engage with the public, not answer questions from elected officials' offices who were trying to get information for their constituents. And they were hiding behind this shield of immunity as a way to block oversight of what was happening behind their walls. And that's just never okay. And, we can have a policy discussion about what we should be doing in a moment of crisis to help allow, emergency responses that need to happen, but we should not give people a pass for becoming bad actors and allowing bad things to happen. And that's why back in May, I introduced, along with Assemblymember Ron Kim, one of the first nursing home accountability bills in response to what we saw happen that would require them to operate in good faith, require them to have adequate supplies of PPE and things like that, require them to allow for, facilitate communication with family members, which they were not doing for a very long time. And then the hammer to that approach is to say, if you do not behave in the way that we expect you to, we will take away your license to operate. We will bring in the state to operate these homes. We know that many of these homes are owned and operated by for-profit entities whose sole purpose is to maximize profit. That incentive is not compatible with the mission of saving lives and keeping people safe and healthy and being responsible neighbors. And so I think we still have a lot more work to do on holding nursing homes accountable, even in light of the changes that we made. And I think there were good changes to make and limiting the liability shield moving forward. But we can't let people get off the hook for what they did under the cover of the crisis happening.
And a quick follow-up for you, Senator. What's the status of that legislative effort to go further here? How many sponsors are on board? What's the likelihood of getting something done this year?
We have quite a few sponsors in both the Assembly and the Senate. I know Beth's on the call. She was actually on our press conference that we did back in May on that. We have now held 2 hearings on nursing homes and COVID, and it's my expectation or my hope or both that now that we've had those hearings, we'll be able to further flesh out and get a deeper look into what happened in our nursing homes. We can improve that legislation and try to get it through the next time we're able to reconvene in the legislature. I think that the hearings are really helpful, and I think that putting the bill out before now gives us a chance to kind of expand it and amend it and make it even stronger. Because what we learned is that there certainly were challenges, but there were also people who could have been more forthright and who could have been better at what they were doing.
Thank you, Senator. I want to hear from 2 more state lawmakers on the panel on this issue before we try to hit on a couple more topics before we run out of time. Senator Persaud, on the nursing home issue, anything to add, your take on the situation?
Well, thank you. I had 2 nursing homes in my district that were part of the news broadcast of being bad actors. And I've had numerous constituents who've had issues. My staff and I were constantly in contact with nursing homes. And I agree with my colleagues, we had to do something to change what was perceived as a blanket coverage for the nursing homes. They use the legislation as cover to not assist families, to not assist lawmakers in getting to the answers. And I agree, we had to do something. The hearings that were held gave us an insight as to what was going on, but there's still many questions that were not answered, and there's still a lot that we have to find out. For families who've lost, I saw someone posted here, one of the nursing homes that was in the news. It says, her uncle or his or her uncle died there. We have to get closure for those families. We have to get answers for those families. It may not be, a monetary payout, but we have to get answers for the family, and that's what we're focused on.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator Felder, we've heard a lot on this issue, but anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah, so I would echo what my colleagues said and not repeat that. I would add that the one item Senator Gounardes just mentioned and the hearings that Senator Rivera held were really very, very revealing on this particular issue, which really affects not only the nursing home deaths, but the deaths in the hospitals as well. That as a result of the pandemic and guidance that came from Albany, they refused to allow family members to see their loved ones at all. And I underline that. And anyone who's had a family member go into an emergency room, or for that matter, in a nursing home, nothing takes the place of having somebody close to the family being near their family member at least sometime during the day, even if it's not long periods. And that is something that directly contributed to the death of thousands and thousands of people in New York City. The fact that there were family members lying in emergency rooms without anybody to say, hey, what's going on? Why hasn't this person been fed or given anything to drink for the last 2 days? Or in the nursing homes as well. The fact that people could not get in at all did not make any sense. If nurses were able to dress up, doctors were treating them, family members should have been given that opportunity to protect their own family members. So with the immunity issue, I agree to most of what had been said, but I think that we cannot ignore the fact that the guidance that came from Albany prohibited nursing homes and hospitals from allowing family members to be on top of things, and nothing takes the place. And God forbid, my mother unfortunately has frequent mileage in the emergency room. I have not had one experience where I could say, you know what, She didn't need somebody in the family. She would have been done well in the emergency room. And she's been in a nursing home as well. And there's not one time that I could say, you know what? If she was there for 10 days by herself, everything would have been perfect. And that was a direct contributor to the deaths of so many people, unfortunately.
Thank you, Senator. Moving on to another topic, and we do have Senator Kavanagh here, Chair of the Housing Committee. I'll pose this question to you. There have been efforts to help people afford housing costs during this crisis, but some initiatives will expire. How will you advance or support new or additional proposals to protect people from losing their homes or affording their rent? Senator Kavanagh. And you're muted, Senator.
This will probably work better if you can hear me. Thank you. This is, we have a lot going on in this topic. First of all, with respect to renters, we have through the court system in place an eviction moratorium through the end of September. So nobody can be evicted and at least until that date. That's something that we began advocating for in March. It's been extended a few times, and again, it's currently in place until the end of September. There are also legislative approaches that would push that out into the future. I've been working on legislation, as has Senator Myrie in my house, and those bills have assembly sponsors as well. In terms of addressing the fact that many people have been unable to pay their rent, we are going to be very much dependent on getting federal resources to do that. Whatever your approach is, it's going to require some money. So a lot of us have advocated for the federal government, which is, as we know, negotiating right now the next round of stimulus and relief to put very substantial amounts of money in for rent and for homeowner costs. Our proposal has been $100 billion nationally for renters, of which New York might get about $10 billion in normal formulas that distribute money for rent assistance. The goal is to provide a program that will really pay the rent of everyone who has lost income during this period, and apply the usual formulas we apply in housing costs in housing subsidy cases programs, so that people wouldn't be responsible for more than 30% of their income going toward their rent, even if it's a much reduced income. And if they have no income at all during this period, we would pay the full cost of that. With respect to homeowners, we passed the strongest piece of forbearance, mortgage forbearance legislation in the country. It applies to all state regulated financial institutions. Unfortunately, there are many people who have mortgages through federal institutions or interstate banks, and we need the federal government to step in to regulate those. We don't have the power to regulate those. But our forbearance bill basically says that if you couldn't pay your mortgage during this period because of hardship related to COVID, you get forbearance, not just pushing those payments to the end of this period, but to the end of your mortgage. So if you couldn't pay your mortgage for 6 months now, and your mortgage goes till 2030, those 6 months of payments wouldn't be due until 2030. Not just, they wouldn't fall on you as this crisis subsides. And you can get 6 months of forbearance and an additional 6 months if the hardship continues. We also do have bills that would propose to fund the housing costs of homeowners. We are proposing to fund the utility costs as well, because that's an essential part of having a habitable home. There is a lot of excitement about the idea of canceling rent entirely out there. It should be noted that even if that's your approach, the current versions of those bills do require funds to compensate the landlords. So on the one hand, people are saying cancel the rent and then compensate landlords. My approach that I've been pushing is to simply pay the rent of anybody who needs the assistance.
Very fascinating details there, Senator. A quick follow-up though, apart from federal funding, if federal funding does not come in to help these efforts, will there be a point when the crisis ends where some number of tenants will have a big bill come due? There'll be this day where they're hit with all this stuff that's been put on hold.
Yeah, I think absent federal funding, the state and city governments are going to have giant fiscal deficits, and those are, the budgets that we rely on for the most basic services, all the services we've been talking about already in healthcare and other things that we depend on. So it's going to be very challenging to solve this problem without some real money. We have taken steps in addition to the ones I mentioned. We passed a bill that says, that has been signed by the governor, that says that if you failed to pay rent during this period because of hardship, that failure to pay rent cannot be the basis for being evicted. It can't be the basis for being evicted ever, those particular arrears. So that will be an ongoing financial burden on people. But we are hoping to continue to take steps to prevent anybody from losing their homes based on that funding. And again, we have some ability to do that legislatively, but the easiest and most straightforward way is going to be to pay people's rent. One more, just to note, we did enact a program to put $100 million out there to begin paying rent. There were almost 90,000 applicants for that. It is intended for low-income people, people who were low-income before and during the crisis and who lost their income. And that HCR is now processing those applications and hoping to get checks out to tens of thousands of people to pay their rent from April through July.
Great, thank you, Senator. I want to squeeze in one more question here before we run out of time. We have an audience question. Any plans to address the digital divide with older adults, which is presenting terrible problems with engaging folks who are sheltering in place and cannot access resources which are available online? If maybe one or two of you might want to hit on that quick. I can pick someone.
I'll take it quickly.
Yeah.
Prior to COVID, ironically, a senior center reached out to me for advocating for funding for technology for the seniors, because they realized that seniors were being left behind. Those seniors who were unable to, they wanted to bridge the gap between the seniors when they were coming to the center and when they're at home. And how can they bridge that gap? And how can we engage also the younger members of the community in assisting these seniors? We have to be able to offer services to seniors in the places where they are. We have to be able to go into our senior centers and teach the seniors how to use the technology. But in doing so, we have to provide the senior centers with the technology. And we haven't done a good job of doing that. During COVID, we have these campaigns that said we're going to give technology to seniors, but many of them didn't know how to use it. And then they had to call for someone to walk them through. Imagine if, any of us on here, anybody who wants to learn something new, you don't know how to do it, and you have to call someone and they're telling you how to do it, and you're like, I've never seen this apparatus before. How am I supposed to? So we have to start going into our senior centers and teaching. And once once we're open for congregate services again, we have to have, AARP can help us with this. Going into every senior center, every senior must become tech savvy, because we do not want to have what has happened to happen again. And we have to, as legislators, we have to ensure that we fund the technology so every senior going to senior center can have a device to take home with them. And that's the way we start to bridge the divide. And you know what? Partnering with the young people. They love technology. Have them teach the seniors. Come into the senior center. Have it as part of their community service that they have to do for school. Go to the senior centers and work with seniors to help teach them to use technology. But we have to spend a lot of money on it. The technology companies, the Apples and the Dells and the Microsofts of the world need to start stepping up and assisting us in helping getting technology out to seniors.
Great, thank you, Senator.
John?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I just wanted to go back because you were talking about housing. I want to make sure that everybody knows that. I want to piggyback on what Senator Kavanagh said, because yes, in the Assembly, we do have lots of members pushing for the rent and mortgage cancellation. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we have a bill sponsored by Yulin New that many of us signed on, which is for the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act of 2020. Which I was proud to sign on. I'm just so disheartened by what's happening right now in the state of New York. And what we're really talking about is that in a couple of months, whenever that day comes, we're gonna have people stuck with a big bill, whether we do forbearance, whatever it is that we say we're doing now, what exactly are we doing? At the end of the day, people are still going to owe several months back of back rent. As well as mortgage payments. So I think that we have to really keep pushing the bar and say, what else can we do? And I think that a combination of state and federal efforts, we have to provide real relief for the people in New York. The people in New York are asking us for relief, and we have to deliver it to them.
Great, thank you, Assemblymember. Unfortunately, we are almost out of time. I'd like to flag, we have our 2020 City and State Virtual Healthy New York Summit coming up on September 17th, 1 to 4 p.m. You can register for free on our website, cityandstateny.com. And now I'll turn it back over to Reggie Nance, Associate State Director of AARP New York, to conclude the program.
Hi, John. And on behalf of AARP New York, I just want to say that this has truly been an hour of power, chock full of really great information. Anytime we can sit for this amount of time and hear from our state elected officials about core issues that affect the 50 plus is a much needed time. So thank you, John, and to City of State for pulling it all together. And thank you to the legislators for carving out time in very, very, very busy schedules where you're operating at an accelerated pace. You're getting an accelerated amount of phone calls from your constituents, but yet you found it important to join us this morning and to talk about the issues that our AARP members care about. And we thank you for that. And I also want to say thank you to all of the people who tuned in to listen on the phone or who joined via Zoom. And we hope that they got information and that they learned something that they otherwise would not have learned. And make no mistake, we are living in unprecedented times. We've got a world pandemic going on, and we've got a confluence of all these other things that are going on at the same time. These are unprecedented times. And we hope that during these unprecedented times that at AARP, we're equipping our members and volunteers with information, such as from this forum this morning, that will allow them to take actions that inform them reaching out to elected officials about the decisions that they're making during these unprecedented times. So we hope that they'll be able to do that. And again, on behalf of AARP New York, I want to thank City and State, John, you and all the elected officials, and to everyone who tuned in. Thank you and have a great day.